Hi, my name is Gauri Adelkar. I'm the writer and director for the short film, The Little Goddess.
Tenzin Punsok, and director of Rituals of Resistance.
Glasses on. Hi, I'm Joy Dietrich. I directed Resistance, Rituals of Resistance with Tenzin.
So just tell me a little bit about the film, the process, why you started making it, and how it came about.
Okay. I made the film as part of my second year directing class at Columbia. I was in film school, and one of my teachers, my directing teacher was Ramin Bharani, who's made films like Chop Shop and Man Pushcart, and he showed us a lot of films like Nanook of the North and Man of Iran. All these films have real people, and these are stories about real people, but they mix fictional elements in the stories. And I was very interested in making a film like that. And my brother and I are a part of an organization called People's Archive of Rural India, which is an online journalistic archive of that'll tell you everything about rural India, people, languages, livelihoods. So I had seen a documentary there about a family of Bahurupis. So in the film, the performance that the family does, they've been doing it for generations, and it's called the Bahurupi, which means like transforming yourself into mythological characters and like asking for money. So I went and met the family in Bengal. I spent time with them, and I was really drawn to them. So I wrote a script, and we made the film.
The question was, what kind of inspired us? So basically, I've been thinking about this film my entire life. I mean, it's one of the things that, I wish. I wish this film was made when I was growing up. I mean, I wish there was a film like this, because there was no film that I could connect to when I went to like movies about Tibet. They were always made by non-Tibetans, and they were always kind of telling a kind of Western or kind of romantic or colonial perspective. And I just wanted to see the stories that I had heard growing up, and kind of just showing that on screen. And I mean, that was kind of my own personal background, but there are some very particular things like the archival film.
So Tenzin founded the Tibet Film Archive like in 2008 or 2006. So he was doing a restoration of a 1966 film called Raid into Tibet, which it was the black and white 16mm film that you guys saw. And so I was helping him with that restoration, and we were initially going to do a behind-the-scenes documentary about the filmmakers that were behind the 1966 film. And these are really famous people, actually. The cinematographer of Raid in Tibet, it was Chris Minges, who is Oscar-winning director and cinematographer. He did The Killing Fields, he did the Mission. So we were going to do initially a behind-the-scenes documentary about it, but then as we went along, we realized that there was a much bigger story about how a people, displaced people, exiles, what happens as time passes, from generation to generation. And so we expanded the documentary from just a biopic about the filmmakers behind Raid in Tibet to a look at, what displaced people can do, what they have chosen to do, and the resilience that they have in the face of oppression and occupation.
Great. So this seemed like it was a very long, complicated process. Maybe briefly tell us about one of the challenges in making the film.
I think the biggest challenge was that I had never been to West Bengal and I don't speak the language that the family speaks. So I had to work with a translator who knows the family. So he played his name is Ankan Roy, and he played a very important part in helping me form a relationship with the family. And then we were shooting in a village that people have phones there, but they don't have public toilets. So it was like a production nightmare. And we didn't have any money, so which like all filmmakers have to go through. But I think the biggest challenge was in terms of production, and it was monsoons in India. We were shooting in summer, so just like carrying equipment in the village because it didn't have roads, so we had to carry it on like carts with wheels, and we couldn't really get all the like cinematic shots because we didn't have like budget for to put tracks or anything. So those were challenges, but we enjoyed it tremendously, so I don't regret it. And then the other challenge was just the directorial challenge of not being able to talk to your actors directly.
So with Rituals, the hardest part was the edit. We had so much footage, so many good stories, and to kind of what did we want the film, like what did we want to end up with that represented 3 generations of resistance and exile? So, for example, Tendar has you can make a whole feature film just on Tendar, you can make a whole feature film on my mother. And it was really hard to just choose the best parts. And we ended up, looking through the whole process of like 1.5 to 2 years of editing, we ended on just focusing on their stories of resistance, like their unique personal stories of resistance. And that was the hardest part, to get to that realization, because when you're sitting down and interviewing them, they have so many great stories. Like Tendar was actually accompanied the Dalai Lama when he escaped. And so like that was fascinating. And so we had a cut where we had him talking about that for about 20 minutes. And then we had another version with my mother talking about when she met her brother and she had to get on a horse, and that was this beautiful story about how they connected to this horse. And I was like, I can't let this go. And that was really, really hard.
So I agree with Tenzin. The most challenging part was editing. It took us, he doesn't quite remember, 3 years. So, and lots of different, hundreds of versions of the story. And so it's so funny, my friend that, Jane, who's hosting us, she's up there, we're having a current debate about how, if all things are narrative and or stories, or if there could be films that are not narrative and not story-based and not linear. So, the challenge in editing was to create a system and to try to craft something that was so vast and huge into something that made sense, and then pull the commonalities out of these diverse elements. So in fact, that for me is storytelling, is to create that. So if you see, I started, as we went along with editing, we pulled out the commonalities among all these diverse parts, like each of the 3 portraits. They all had significant thing happening to them at 9 years old. And then we also started like, wow, each generation had this great media. With Tendar was 16 millimeter film. With Doma, it was home video footage. And with Lakba was the cell phone film footage. And each generation had a unique media at their disposal to capture their stories. So it really helped us, me to sort of figure out the system to help the edit.
I think I can make if we were to do this again, there's no way we could have planned this. It just you discover it in the edit.
And just, and it's basically me and Tenzin doing the whole thing for so long. It was really a handmade film, and, but we started loving all the faults and the things that don't look the best Hollywood way, but we enjoy the crazy, shaky footage.
Well, both the films looked really gorgeous. I think we only have time for one more question, and I'm going to pull one from the audience here. So if anyone has a burning question, okay, you in the back?
I'll yell loudly.
Okay.
One common feature that I saw between the two films is the amazing sound you both use. And so I just wanted to, it's a very open question, just to sort of speak to the role of sound when you brought that into the film and the particular composers that you worked with. So I thought it really worked very well to capture the mood of both of the films. I just wanted to open that out.
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. So some of the sounds that we used in our film were naturally like on set, because this village is, it's not polluted by like cars or something. So, you can hear crickets even in the morning. So my sound guy would just go when we were not shooting and just get random sounds that I've sort of used, like dispersed throughout the film. Then there's a song, I don't know if you remember, when the mother gets up in the morning and she's praying, and there's this old song that's playing on the radio. That was actually a guy in the village going on his cycle on like a loudspeaker, and that's what they do in the village. They play these old songs. So my sound guy had captured that, so we used that there. And then there are a couple of places where I had to use like sound from like a sound library. But most of it was like natural sounds, and we sort of like distributed it in the edit.
Before I answer that question, I just wanted to thank Asian Cinevision and AAIFF for having us, and for you guys all for coming. One of the things I really appreciate about this film festival is that you're showing a film from a demographic and two filmmakers who are the minority of the minority. There's only 10,000 U.S. Tibetans and 10,000 Tibetans in exile in the U.S. And it's we're a tiny little voice, and so you guys are giving us this platform, so we really appreciate that. Thank you. And to answer your question about sound, we actually have a really great collaborator with Alex Zhang Hung Tai. He's a Taiwanese, Canadian, Los Angelino, awesome music composer, and he's fantastic. He made an album called Stateless, and as soon as he made that album, I said, I got to work with him, because he's making music that embodies the kind of experience that I think this film is trying to share. And so that was a great, collaboration. Also, the film is just kind of handmade. Like, he just scored it. Like, basically, we gave him a rough cut. He scored it, and that was it. There was no, do-overs or any critiques. It was like, that's what you get. And it was, that's just how the film worked,
Thank you so much for the filmmakers for showing up and making these movies.
Thank you guys.
So much. One last thing, I'd like to thank Asia Society for having us. And also, you guys came in with these half-sheet surveys. If you could fill those out, that would help us out greatly. Thank you again.